enjoy reading through the Gospels. We cover a different number of topics as we go through the New Testament survey, but today we want to look at evidence for the New Testament. I decided not to go through every single piece of evidence we have for the New Testament, or else we may be here for many days. That is how much evidence there is for the New Testament. But I decided to highlight some things that I find interesting, and so we'll just pass that on to you this morning. And one of the reasons why, and one of the things we'll look at today, is a lot of people don't believe the Bible. And they don't follow Jesus, not because there's not evidence that the Bible's true, but it is because they have stubborn hearts and do not want to believe it. What we're going to look at today in just a few moments will be evidence, not just evidence for the New Testament, but evidence from non-Christian sources that the New Testament is true and can be trusted. But before we go there, I want us to look at Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. When Jesus was going around, he did many miracles. And the thing that's very interesting is people's reaction to Jesus' miracles. And in this passage we're going to look at today, we're going to see a particular reaction to Jesus' miracles. And starting in verse number 1. Another time he went to the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. It's very interesting. Here's a situation where there were people that had a little animosity against Jesus. They were looking at Jesus and they was wanting him to fail. They was wanting to find something that they could accuse him of. And they're watching him. And they actually watch what he does. And he actually, before their very eyes, he does a miracle. Now I have a feeling these same people, they've probably seen, or if not, they have at least heard about many miracles that Jesus had done. But here it is, right in front of them. And it was a man with a shriveled hand. So that's something that everybody could see. It was a visible one. It wasn't, "Hey, you're healed of a headache." "Oh yes, my headache's gone." It's kind of hard to judge that one. But this, he had a physical deformity right in front of him, and Jesus healed him. They saw it. But in verse 5 it says, he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. The hearts were cold, the hearts were frozen. It wasn't a facts issue, it wasn't an evidence issue, it wasn't an intelligent issue. It was a heart issue. And if they saw that right in front of their eyes, I have a feeling that it didn't matter what Jesus did, guess what? They weren't going to believe him. They weren't going to believe him no matter what. They were not going to believe him. So what I want us to look at today is we're going to look at some evidence. Now, that doesn't mean if you present all this evidence to everybody that they are just going to believe. Because it's not about the evidence. It's about the heart issue. But I know one thing as a follower of Jesus Christ, when I see the evidence, maybe because I'm a weak believer, it increases my faith. It gives me more confidence. Because I listen to the world, and the world keeps telling me, it's not true, it's made up, it's changed over time, there's contradictions and errors. And I hear all these things. I don't even know if Jesus existed. I hear all these things is what the world says. And you keep hearing them and keep hearing them, and if you don't look into it, you might start believing some of it. I'm here today to give you some evidence that maybe will increase your faith a little bit, increase your confidence in God's Word. First, I just want to look at some archaeological evidence. You know, there is a ton of it, and I've read books that just one thing after another, but this is one that I was not familiar with, so when I ran across it, I at least just want to show you one piece of evidence. They call it the Pilate Stone. And they found this, and they believe that this was dated back to the time of Pontius Pilate. So this was around when Jesus was there. Now they discovered it in 1961. They discovered a piece of carved limestone inscribed with the name of Pontius Pilate. And then it has some other inscriptions on there as well. To the divine Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, and then it has dedicated. That's about all they have. They don't have all the details, but where it was found out, there was a building that Herod the Great built. Previously in our studies, we talked a little about Herod the Great. He built a lot of things. He was a builder. So he built this building, and then what happened is later on, they would add to it. And they added another section to it, a little bit newer section. And when they added this newer section, they dedicated it, and that's when Pontius Pilate was in charge. So what I'm going to go through, and what we're going to do, we're going to look at evidence, and it just proves different things. This is one piece of evidence that proves that Pontius Pilate was actually a person, and that he was a leader of Judea during the time of Jesus. That's a pretty good bit of information. But now I want to go through, some non-Christian sources, most of them historians or other people that lived in a certain time, and they give us evidence, recorded history, recorded evidence that Jesus actually existed. Do you know there are some people that say that Jesus did not exist? That's okay, he lived a long time ago. Is there any evidence that Jesus existed? Well, it seems like if he did all the things that that the Word of God says he did, it seems like maybe other people will be writing about it as well, and that is what had happened. That is exactly what we have here. The first piece of evidence I want to look at that's from non-Christian sources was from Flavius Josephus. He was a Jewish historian. Lived about AD 37 to 100. So he was born just a little after Jesus left this earth in physical form. He was a Jewish historian. I say that Jewish because that means he was not a Christian. And he wrote he went through and he chronicled the Jewish history. And he's got books, and they're really thick, and they're very detailed. And historians love them because they give you so much information about things that happen, a little bit behind the scenes that you normally wouldn't know. But anyway, he's got a little section in there about Jesus, and I want to read it to you today. I know the print's a little small, but I think all of it was pretty important. Remember, this is from a Jewish historian. There was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was Christ, and some edits would say he claimed to be Christ, or he said he was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal man amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets have foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him and the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Josephus also tells us about James, the half-brother of Jesus. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road, so he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James. And some others, when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. Josephus gives us one more reference here to John the Baptist. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God as a just punishment of what Herod had done against John, who was called the Baptist. I want to make sure you understand, a lot of people will discredit other Christian writers because they say they're biased. So what we're going through today, these are not Christians. These are non-Christian people who are writing historically, and in their history that they're writing, they mention Jesus. They mention James. They mention John the Baptist. But he's not the only historian. We have Cornelius Tacitus. He was a Roman historian. Now, I do have to warn you, not everything that the historians, the non-Christian historians wrote was positive about Jesus. Josephus, his was a little bit more positive because he was sort of writing what his Jesus' followers sort of said about him. Well, they sort of believed it was a Christ, they believed this, they believed that. And now we have a report from a Roman. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero, I'll back up a little bit. This is after Rome had got on fire. A lot of Rome had burned, and Nero decided to blame the Christians, and this is a report of that. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite torture on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. So this is very interesting. It tells us that Christians got their name from Christus, that suffered the extreme penalty. And he tells us under who, which we already have evidence for that as well. And then it talks about how he calls Christianity a mischievous superstition, which I don't agree with that. I hope you don't either. But then he talks about how it broke out and it started to spread. Very interesting. Then we have Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger was a Roman governor in Asia Minor. And this is what he says. They, Christians, were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, but of an ordinary and innocent kind. Another Roman. I think this is one of my favorites, Lucian of Samosata. He was a satirist. He was a pagan satirist. He was not a fan of Christianity at all, and that is coming across in his writings. And he wrote about between AD 125 and 180. But why I find this one so fascinating is because here it is, a pagan satirist. Satirist would be somebody who's a comedian. Think of somebody on maybe late night TV or, I don't know, they still do it like a Saturday Night Live or something like that, where they're sort of making fun of the people of the day. And the interesting thing about it, he's not fond of Christians, and here he is making fun of them. But because he did that, his writings were kept. And now we as Christians are able to use what he said, even though it's not positive towards Christians, use what he said as evidence of things that existed back then or things that were going on. Let's read it. The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. You see, these misguided creatures, he's talking about Christians, start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains their contempt to death and voluntarily self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage. That's what he's calling Jesus. And live after his laws. All this they take quite on faith, with the result that they, despite all worldly goods alike, regard them merely as common property. Then we get into the Jewish Talmud. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jewish Talmud. It is a collection of rabbinical Jewish writings. I had an opportunity when I was working on one of my degrees, I forgot which one, but I had to go interview a Jewish rabbi. And in interviewing him, my paper was on the differences between like Christianity and the Jewish religion. And going into it, I thought, wow, this is going to be kind of fun and interesting because we're probably a lot alike. What I've always been told is Jews believe the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. I believe the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I'm walking in there with thinking, okay, we got a lot in common here. And so I sit down and was talking to them and found out their beliefs were very complicated. And one of the reasons why is because, yes, they believe the Old Testament, but they have some other books they go by too. And then they also have the Talmud, which is almost like a set of encyclopedias. Lots of rules and regulations, you know, when we're going through, and you probably heard before about how they were so detailed on a lot of rules. Even when Jesus was around, they'll say, if you walk more than, 10 feet, then that's considered work. Well, that's not in the Bible. Where they come up with that at is that the Jewish rabbis would figure that out, and they would write it down, and then you would abide by it. So in these writings, again, they're Jewish. I hope you understand, we do feel like we got a lot in common with our Jewish brother and sister, but the more you get into it, the more you see we really don't. And in fact, a lot of the Jews find Christians very offensive to them. I think one time we had a missionary to come from Israel, and I was shocked because, hey, if I was ever a missionary, that'd be one place I like to go, would be Israel. And not many missionaries go to Israel. And one of the reasons why, not that they're persecuted like some of the Muslim countries, but it is so hard that people will not even give you a chance. They look at you as someone that blasphemes their religion, and you're very shunned upon in the whole community. I say all that because this is not going to be very positive, but it does give you some evidence. This is pretty old, actually. There's 3 sections from 3 different books here, and they say not too positive things, but they are talking about Jesus, which is providing some more historical evidence. Onkelos then went and raised Jesus the Nazarene from the grave through necromancy. Jesus went and stood up on a brick and worshipped it as an idol. He caused the masses to sin. Okay, I don't believe that happened. but they are referencing Jesus as a real person. Next section, Jesus the Nazarene performed sorcery, and he incited the masses and subverted the masses and caused the Jewish people to sin because he had many converts that were Jewish. Next one, on Passover Eve, they hung the corpses of Jesus the Nazarene after they killed him by way of stoning because he practiced sorcery, incited people to idol worship, and led the Jewish people astray. Again, I'm not saying that these are hardline facts, but it is interesting. They are mentioning the person, Jesus the Nazarene, who caused many Jewish people to sin. I think that's pretty interesting. But then if you go even to current non-Christian historians, this is current non-Christian historians. This is Brian McCain. He's an archaeologist and historian of religions and Judaism at the Atlantic University of Florida. Now make sure you understand that sounds like, well, man, they're probably a Christian. They're archaeologists and they teach about the history of religions and Judaism. Let me help you out there. These are not Bible-believing Christians. If you look at all their writings, 90% of what this individual will say will be negative against the Bible. He doesn't believe the New Testament is true. He doesn't believe that Jesus did miracles. Let me make sure. He is not a Christian. He's teaching in our universities today. But he says this: broad and deep consensus among scholars. I do not know nor have I heard of any trained historian or archaeologist who has doubts about his existence. And here he is talking about Jesus. So they'll debate a lot of things. Well, did he commit miracles? Did he do this? Did he do that? Was he the Son of God? And they'll say no on a lot of this. But they won't even think to question whether Jesus existed or not, because the evidence is overwhelming. And they didn't use any Christian sources. And the last guy I want to show you about, I have talked to him about him a number of times. His name was Bart Ehrman. And he is, we'll get into a little bit of stuff, but let's go ahead and I'll show you 3 different quotes from him. We'll start with the first one. With respect to Jesus, we have numerous independent accounts of his life and the sources lying behind the Gospels and the writings of Paul. Sources that originated in Jesus' native tongue, Aramaic, and that can be dated to within just a year or two of his life, before the religion moved to convert pagans in droves. Historical sources like that are pretty astounding for an ancient figure of any kind. The claim that Jesus was simply made up falters on every ground. Bart Ehrman is an agnostic scholar whose writings frequently attack Christianity and its truth claims. I'll give you another quote from him, but before I do, I want you to see this is one of the books that he wrote. Misquoting Jesus. The subtitle, if you can't read it, says, A Story Behind Who Changed the Bible and Why. If you listen to Bart Ehrman, he will say that over time the Bible has changed and it's nothing like it. What we have today is nothing like it was when it was first written. If I was arguing with him, I would say, well, show me the evidence. Let's look at the manuscripts. We got a lot of manuscripts. Show me where it's changed. We looked at that a little last week. But he has become famous. He has made millions of dollars writing books, and this is the kind of books that he writes. Books that are attacking Christianity, that attack the New Testament. Here's another quote. He says, despite the enormous range of opinion, there are several points on which virtually all scholars of antiquity agree. Jesus was a Jewish man, known to be a preacher and teacher, who was crucified, a form of Roman execution, in Jerusalem during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea. This is very interesting. One of the most outspoken, probably people in America, if not the world, against the New Testament and against Christianity, these are things that he admits. The reason why he admits them is because the evidence is so overwhelming. And I'll tell you how adamant he is. What Bart Ehrman does, he goes around to seminaries. This is one of his favorite places to go, and he will debate Christians on whether you can trust the New Testament. And he was asked one time, well, I want to have a debate with somebody who said, I want to have a debate with you, but I don't want to have it at a seminary. I want to go to some atheist group club or something, or maybe a secular university, and I want to debate you there. He said, no, we're not debating there. Because he doesn't want those people to hear the evidence for Jesus Christ. He wants to go into seminaries. He wants to go into churches and cast doubt on the people, on Christians. And it works. I actually went to one of his debates. There's actually this one right here. That was in New Orleans when I was going to seminary there. And got to see his debate, but that is what he does. He is adamantly against Christianity. Now, if you ask him what does he believe, he'll say he's agnostic. And a lot of people will say that, but not a lot of agnostic people. If you don't know, that's what agnostic means, sort of, well, I'm not sure, I don't know. You don't spend your entire life and use your entire career attacking Christianity. That's why it's so interesting on what he says. One of the strongest critics against Christianity gives us these claims about Jesus. Let's look at this one. Jesus existed, and those vocal persons who deny it do so not because they have considered the evidence with the dispassionate eye of the historian, but because they have some other agenda that this denial serves. You got to understand, because he is anti-Christian and has made his living writing books against Christianity, he goes to events, he goes to book signing, and the people that come there are really anti-Christian. And it's very interesting because he started going to a lot of these things and started getting famous, and he would run across a lot of people, and a lot of people would just say, they'd repeat what they heard in other colleges or universities or maybe on TV. They'll say, well, we don't even know if Jesus existed. And some would even say, Jesus didn't even exist. And it's really funny because as an atheist historian, he would be up there's video of him doing this, he would be defending that Jesus exists to a bunch of atheists. In fact, they got to the point, you know what he did? He wrote a book on the whole topic was Jesus existed. Now, he follows it up with, he wasn't the Son of God, and you can't trust the New Testament, and he didn't do any miracles, and he's not the Savior, and all these other things. But he wrote a book titled Jesus Existed, and just provide evidence after evidence, because it got to the point where people wasn't even using logical reasoning anymore. So I went through, there was a lot there. We're going to have this, the PowerPoints will be posted on our website. I'll even put I was going to make a copy, but it's like 4 pages. So that was going to be a lot of papers for us to copy and a lot for you to carry around. But if you want this information, it is good information. It will be available to you. But the reason why I do this is to let you know there is evidence for the New Testament. There is evidence on so many details, and I could spend hours and hours on just a little detail here or a little detail there that is proven by archaeological evidence or by historians that everybody else considered their work just amazing and trustworthy. So there is evidence for the New Testament. And that's good, and you may convince some people to believe in Christianity by evidence, because there's a variety of people out there. There's some people out there that won't believe no matter what. They have a cold heart. There's some people that just don't know, and they just believe what they hear. Well, I always heard that Jesus didn't even exist, that there's no evidence. Now, those people, God can use you in communicating truth to touch their hearts. But really, what I want you to focus on is I want you to think about what we read earlier. And there were those people that were seeing Jesus do miracles, yet they wouldn't believe. Right before their eyes, and they would not believe because they had cold hearts. You claim you believe Jesus is the Son of God. The question is, are you living a life that demonstrates what you believe, what you say you believe? Do you really believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Do you really believe that Jesus is the Savior of your soul? Because we can get factual things and historical things. We can have a lot of evidence, but you know what the number one piece of evidence that convinces others that Jesus is real? Is you and me. Is our lives. How are we living? Do they see Jesus in us? Are we different than the world? Are we doing the things that Jesus tells us to do, or are we just doing the things that we want to do? Being a Christian is different than being a non-Christian. And to most people, nobody can tell the difference anymore. Because we say we believe, but we really don't live like it. We can see the evidence over and over again, but our lives aren't changing. We're not willing to give it all to Jesus Christ. We're not willing to be a little radical for Jesus Christ, to just throw out everything else and just make Jesus number one. We're not willing to do it because I believe we have cold hearts. The evidence is there, and most of us even look in our lives and say, well, Jesus, I remember when Jesus did that, and Jesus did that, and I saw him do that miracle and that miracle. I know Jesus is real. But then we just live our lives for ourselves. It's not an evidence issue, it's a heart issue. Where is your heart? One thing I love about Jesus, it's supposed to be a picture of a heart frozen in ice. The thing I love about Jesus Christ is that he takes you where you are. He doesn't expect you to be perfect. One thing I love about church, and I hope you understand, is I want to convict you on things. I hope God uses my words, and he uses words about his truth to bring conviction on you. But I hope also you see there's hope. I don't want you to be satisfied where you're at. You can do better. I can do better. And we should be constantly seeking to walk closer with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And even if our hearts aren't completely frozen, a lot of our hearts are a little chilly. Maybe we have a little icicles hanging off. One thing amazing about Jesus Christ, we don't change that. We run to God, and that's when we put our faith in God, and we allow God to change that. And he wants to, and he's willing. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you've done. He loves you, and he wants to change your heart. He wants to soften your heart so that you can receive his love and in return love others with the kind of love that he has. Don't miss the message of today. Let God examine your heart. We need people that don't say, maybe we should change our name from being Christians. Maybe we should call ourselves believers. I believe this, and it shows in my life. Be a stronger believer. Let it show more in your life. God can do amazing things through you, and he wants to. Just let him.